Intro hooked the sentence that stops the scroll. They told her that desire fades with age. But on her 70th birthday, Margaret discovered the opposite. Opening scene, cinematic hook. Margaret sat by the window, the golden afternoon light, spilling across the wrinkles in her hands. For most of her life, she believed what everyone said, that passion, touch, and the thrill of intimacy were things for the young. But here she was, 69 years old, and realizing something nobody had warned. Her desires hadn't disappeared. They had changed, not faded, not vanished, evolved. Setting the stage. Psychological curiosity. Welcome back to Stoic Mindset Wisdom, where we dive into the truths about human behavior and relationships that most people shy away from. Today's topic is a hidden chapter in the story of life. What really happens to women's preferences and intimacy after the age of 6-9? The research is fascinating and at times surprising. It's not just about biology, it's about decades of experience, the rewiring of the brain's reward system, and the way deep emotional connection starts to outweigh the adrenaline. Rush of novelty. The myth we've been sold from Hollywood scripts to casual jokes. We've been fed the idea that romance after 60 is little more than holding hands on park benches, sure. That's part of it, but it's far from the whole truth. Surveys from respected institutions like the Kinsey Institute reveal something powerful. Many women in their late 60s, 70s, and even 80s still enjoy intimacy just as much, sometimes more than in their younger years. The difference? It's how they enjoy it. Why the shift happens. The science by the late 60s. The female body has gone through monumental changes. Menopause, shifts in hormone levels, and changes in muscle tone in the pelvic floor. But these physical changes don't necessarily lower desire. In fact, for many women, desire becomes more selective, tuned not toward casual encounters, but toward emotional closeness, trust, and deliberate connection. The brain's reward center, the same part that reacts to excitement and novelty, starts responding more to cues like sustained eye contact, gentle, unhurried breathing, affectionate touch, a sense of safety. This is why many women at this stage prefer slower, deeper, more controlled intimacy, not because of limitation, but because it feels more complete. Breaking the stereotype. Here's the twist most people never see coming. Some women report greater satisfaction in their 70s than they did in their 30s south. Why? 2 words, self-awareness and communication. At 70, there's no guessing game about what feels good or what don't. The pressure to perform is replaced by a focus on shared experience. And in that shift lies the secret to why intimacy can actually become richer, even as the world assumes it's fading. Cliffhanger transition. But this is just the beginning, because the real story, the one nobody talks about, isn't just about the physical changes. It's about the hidden, psychological rewiring that happens after 69. It's a silent reshaping of desire that can make intimacy feel brand new again. And in part 2, we're going to meet Margaret's partner. A man who thought he knew everything about her after 40 years together, till one night proved him wrong. Act 1, The Awakening. Margaret had never thought much about the passing of years. At 45, she still felt the same spark she'd had. At 30, at 60, she was busier than ever. Grandchildren, volunteering, traveling with friends. But the day she turned 69, something shifted. It wasn't that she felt older. It was that she began noticing how differently she was experiencing moments of closeness with her husband, Daniel. One evening, as they sat together on their back porch, the crickets singing and the moonlight spilling over the lawn, she realized, I don't crave more, crave deeper. A subtle shift for decades. Margaret and Daniel's intimacy had been spontaneous, sparked by a touch in the kitchen, a laugh in the car, a lingering kiss at the end of the day. But now her mind and body seemed to respond differently. Gone was the rush of adrenaline that used to excite her in younger years. In its place was something warmer, steadier, a longing for connection that unfolded slowly. Almost like a dance that neither of them needed to hurry. And it wasn't just her imagination. According to a 2022 study from the Journal of Sexual Medicine, women in their late 60s and 70s often report increased satisfaction from slower, more deliberate intimacy than they did decades earlier. The reasons? Hormonal evolution shift in brain reward pathways. Lifetime of self-knowledge. Brain's quiet transformation. Margaret didn't know the science, but she was living it. During younger years, the human brain reacts strongly to novelty, driven by dopamine spikes that make new experiences thrilling. But by the late 60s, those pathways shift. In women especially, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, plays a greater role in satisfaction. This means closeness, eye contact, and touch start to carry as much, if not more, weight than purely physical stimulation. Margaret didn't want less intimacy. She wanted intimacy that meant something. Daniel's perspective. Daniel had noticed changes, too, but he didn't know how to interpret them. For months, he had quietly worried. Was she losing interest? Was it his fault? He was hesitant to bring it up, fearing the answer. But then one evening, Margaret reached for his hand and whispered, "It's not that I want less. I want more. It's just a different kind of more." The myth that crumbles. Most people think desire declines sharply after a certain age. A belief reinforced by decades of media portrayals, but reality tells another story. A Kinsey Institute survey found that a majority of women over 69 still reported enjoying penetrative intimacy. Many said their emotional satisfaction was higher than in their 30s. For Margaret, this was exactly her truth. The physical act itself was still important, but now it was the pace, trust, and emotional buildup that defined her pleasure. A new chapter begins over the next weeks. Margaret and Daniel began exploring this new chapter in their relationship. They slowed down. They talked more. They focused on the little things, the gentle brush of fingertips, the quiet moments before sleep, the way a look could speak louder than words. But one night, something unexpected happened. Daniel suggested trying something different, something they hadn't done in years, and what followed would challenge everything Margaret thought she knew about herself. A set to the experiment. The night began like any other. Margaret had finished cleaning the kitchen. Daniel had been tinkering with his tools in the garage. They met in the living room, each with a cup of tea, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. But Daniel seemed different. Not nervous exactly. More like he was holding back something he wanted to say. The suggestion, finally. After a few minutes of quiet, he put his cup down and leaned forward. "Daniel, you remember the way we used to take our time? No distractions, no rush?" Margaret smiled. "Of course, we had nothing but time back then." "Daniel, I was thinking, maybe we should bring some of that back. It's not just in the bedroom, but in everything, even the way we start." He didn't mean anything explicit. What he was suggesting was a deliberate, drawn-out form of connection, something they hadn't done in years. The psychology behind the proposal, what Daniel was unknowingly tapping into, is something psychologists call erotic pacing. Unlike the impulsive, fast-paced encounters that are often glamorized in youth, erotic pacing is the slow build, the kind that keeps the brain's anticipation circuits firing for longer, according to Dr. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist and senior researcher at the Kinsey Institute. When we slow down, we activate different parts of the brain associated with bonding and emotional safety. This not only deepens connection, but can enhance physical pleasure, especially as we age. Margaret's hesitation, but here's the thing, slowing down sounds romantic in theory. In reality, it requires vulnerability. Margaret felt a flutter of excitement, but also a twinge of uncertainty. Would it feel as good as she remembered? Would her body respond the same way? Would Daniel notice if it didn't? A plan without a clock. They agreed on one rule: no rush, no schedule, no expectation. They would let the night unfold on its own. They started with something simple: music. Not the radio or a playlist, but the same vinyl records they'd played in their first apartment together. The crackle of the record player filled the air. Like an old friend returning home, the shift in atmosphere What happened next was subtle, but powerful. Margaret's shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. Daniel's eyes softened. They weren't trying to make anything happen, and that, in itself, was the spark. This mirrors a common finding in research on older couples. Removing performance pressure often reignites desire. When the goal is connection rather than outcome, the body follows naturally. The unexpected reaction at one point. Daniel leaned in, his hand resting lightly on hers. Something about the weight of that touch, the patience in it, made Margaret's heart race in a way she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't lust in the way she remembered from her youth. It was deeper. She realized she was craving something she couldn't name, something that was as much emotional as it was physical. The science of why researchers call this integrated desire, when emotional intimacy and physical attraction merge into one experience. For many women over 69, this integration becomes more satisfying than the high intensity encounters of earlier years. The focus shifts from how quickly can we get there to how deeply can we connect. The turning point. The night stretched on. The tea went cold. The music looped and crackled. Margaret,